strong national defense for the United States is not only indispensable to arms control, but for the security, freedom, and peace of the entire world. A real and secure peace depends on us, on our courage to build it, and guard it, and pass it on to future generations. George Washington's words ring just as true today. To be prepared for war, he said, is one of the most effective means of preserving the peace. American strength is a sheltering arm for peace and freedom in an often dangerous world. And strength is the most persuasive argument we have to convince our adversaries to give up their hostile intentions, to negotiate seriously, and to stop bullying other nations. In the real world, peace through strength must be our motto.
So the Reagan National Defense Forum, what is that? Well, the Defense Forum, and you'll probably hear us call it RNDF, and the Defense Forum brings together key leaders in the political spectrum and key stakeholders in the defense community, such as members of Congress, current and former administration officials, senior military leadership, industry executives, technology innovators, and thought leaders. Now, their mission as a group is to review and assess the policies that strengthen America's defense in the context of a global threat environment. RNDF allows all these people to get together to discuss and debate how the United States can lead the world in an era of increasingly complex challenges and opportunities. So to talk about the Defense Forum, as I said, I'm joined here by a panel of two, which we really appreciate. The Reagan Institute Director, Roger Zackheim, and the Reagan Institute Policy Director, Rachel Hoff. So thank you both for joining me. I appreciate it. Very busy week for you guys. So we're going to start at the very beginning. Now, the Defense Forum has been going on since 2013. And Roger, you were part of the team. You didn't even work for us yet. Helped create the idea, launch the program. So can you sort of talk about the concept origin and how it's come to be?
Well, it's appropriate that we're in this room, the Air Force One Pavilion, talking about this, because it was in this space where we conceived the idea of having the Reagan National Defense Forum. You may recall, at the time I was working on the House Armed Services Committee, and the chairman of the committee, a gentleman named Buck McKeon, came to the Reagan Library to deliver a speech. And when we were out here, we saw this amazing venue, this amazing space, of course, with President Reagan's legacy hovering over it on national defense. And we knew we needed a convening for the national defense community. At the time, we were in the midst of wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. There was real division within the national defense community, and most importantly, and relevant to the Reagan National Defense Forum, there was not a single convening where we could bring together all the stakeholders that you referenced before. Congress, administration officials from the Pentagon, thought leaders, military leaders, and we thought if we brought them here to the Reagan National Defense Forum to discuss peace through strength on an annual basis, it would really advance President Reagan's legacy and help our national defense community.
So again, as I said, our first one was December of 2013. Do you remember how far before that the idea surfaced? How long did it take to launch the first one?
Just over a year, Melissa. So it was a speech, as I referenced, where Buck McKeon, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, gave, I believe, sometime in 2012, maybe the end of 2011. And at that moment, we started working on the idea. We developed the concept, and the former executive director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation Institute, John Hybush, just latched on to the idea. I think he wanted 1,000 people to come the first year. That was a little more difficult in year one, but as you know, a decade plus later, it's hard to keep people away from the Reagan National Defense Forum.
Exactly. Now, I think when we talk about the Defense Forum, one of the things, at least in my mind, that's the most important thing to talk about is this is nonpartisan. So we're at the Ronald Reagan Library. People think, that it must be Republican. No, this is a nonpartisan forum. As an example, we have hosted, I think, the Secretary of Defense for every single year except, I believe, one. Doesn't matter what the administration is, the Secretary of Defense has come. Can you talk about how we've been able to build it this way?
Well, peace through strength and national defense, of course, is something that doesn't belong to one party. It's not a partisan issue. American security is something that all Americans care about. The members of each political party certainly want to advance. I have different ideas on how to realize that goal. And so that is an underlying element of the Reagan National Defense Forum and really advances a core legacy of President Reagan's time in office. Of course, he brought together Republicans and Democrats to advance his national defense agenda. It was something that peace through strength was something that everybody bought into in his day. That was part of his great accomplishment. And so we do that. We, as you mentioned, we bring the Secretary of Defense regardless of the administration. It's almost the Secretary of Defense is convening, where the Secretary of Defense could get up and speak now. It's over 700 people, and address the entire national defense community and talk about the policies that he is advancing. And then on stage, we make a point, and my colleague Rachel can elaborate on this. She does a fantastic job putting together the panels that we'll be enjoying this Saturday. We'll have Republicans and Democrats, chairmen, ranking members of the senior members of the defense committees in the Congress, and other members. There'll be a delegation of over nearly 30 House members and Senate members. There'll be Republicans and Democrats, usually evenly split. So that is a key element of the Defense Forum. I think it creates legitimacy. And again, this is not necessarily about everybody agreeing. So certainly Republicans and Democrats will have differences that they express on stage, but they're all talking about national defense, and that's the core mission of our forum.
That's a great answer, which leads perfectly to the question I have for Rachel over here, because you live and breathe this, I think, all year long. So as Roger just said, the Defense Forum is all day on Saturday. I think we start this year around 7:45 a.m. Pacific, 4:45 a.m. Eastern. It runs all day until about 5 o'clock, and it's made up of about 10 panels. It's made up of fireside chats and keynotes and all these different types of things. And I think it's sort of your responsibility, Rachel, to put these panels together, find the moderators and find the panelists. How do you go about doing that?
My responsibility and indeed my honor. It's a real privilege to join Roger and in this work. It's something that we really start. Of course, we're thinking about it, and there are elements of the planning that happen throughout the year. The events in December every year. We take a little break for the holidays, and January things are pretty up and well running for December of the following year. But around the summertime, we start thinking in earnest about what will be the timely conversations in December. Looking forward, of course, there will always be things that come up that we want to be sure we incorporate into the panel discussions and the plenary sessions on stage at the Defense Forum. But Roger and I and our colleagues at the Reagan Institute come up with a set of ideas in terms of what we want the panels to focus on. Those might be different regions of the world. Of course, in 2013, when the Defense Forum started, there was a big focus on the Middle East as the priority region. There's been a shift in focus toward the Asia Pacific region as the rise of the China threat has become even more important in recent years. And then, of course, just in the last couple of years, the violence back to the Middle East and also the war in Ukraine have taken a great deal of time and attention for RNDF. And we also have some kind of more functional topics that we focus on. We'll have a panel on Saturday looking at technology and innovation as it relates to our national security. We'll have a panel on Saturday that looks at our manufacturing base. Are we able to produce what we need at speed and at scale to meet our national security needs here in America when it's important that we do so? Working with allies and partners around the world has always been an important topic that we talk about at RNDF. And so we spend the better part of the fall really kind of recruiting the best speakers for each of those topics from those constituent communities that you and Roger talked about, certainly on a bipartisan basis from Congress, current administration officials, former administration officials, also on a bipartisan basis. CEOs from defense and technology companies. They're such an important part of the policy conversations that happen at the Defense Forum as well. And so we make sure that all of those perspectives, as well as, of course, senior uniformed military leaders, will have, I believe, 11 four-star generals and admirals here on property on Saturday, and many of them will be speaking on panels throughout the day, service chiefs and combatant commanders who are leading our men and women in uniform as well.
Just want to add something Rachel said, and really she deserves the credit for this. We bring all these different players on stage. All of them have a key and important role in our national defense. It is not a kumbaya fest. Right? This is not the sort of thing where we're trying to get everybody to agree. In fact, it's the opposite. This is people coming on stage with different viewpoints on how we strengthen American national defense, but they do it in a civil framework, and they all want to talk about it through the lens of what can make America stronger. And I think that's the lasting legacy of the Defense Forum, and it's something that Rachel does a fantastic job year over year, designing these conversations, sometimes debates, sometimes having what we call positive friction, because that's what really advances the policy conversation for those leading our national defense community and really for all Americans.
Well, and when the day is over, you've had 50 to 75 people on stage participating in some part of the conversation, and you're managing all of those different people and their thoughts. So, and each RNDF has a different theme. So if you want to mention what this year's theme is.
This year's theme is Peace Through Strength in a Time of Transition. So obviously we want to anchor, as we've mentioned, the Defense Forum in President Reagan's legacy of peace through strength. We're really proud that legacy has such impact on both sides of the aisle in today's political environment. That in a time of transition, I'm sure the audience will know, this moment of transition that we're in right now in terms of the political power in Washington, in between the elections that happened last month and the political transition that will happen next month. Of course, the change in leadership in the White House, but also in Congress with shifting majorities. And so we want to be sure that our policy conversations here with this very interestingly timed conference this year are really uniquely able to add value to what future leaders, whether they're in Congress, in the military, in the incoming Trump administration, how they think about those policies to advance America's national defense and America's strength.
Pretty unique that we're doing this during a transition. Things happens every 4 years, but actually 4 years ago, where there was a transition, change in administration, of course, we were in the midst of COVID. So we were unable to host the Reagan National Defense Forum. That was the 1 year since we started in 2013 where we did not have a defense forum. So this one is particularly special and unique. And as Rachel mentioned, we're going to be looking and discussing for areas of continuity, because there are areas of continuity in national defense regardless of administration, and areas of change. And there are lots of them that we'll be discussing this weekend.
Well, I have a lot more questions, but first we're going to go to the screens. And as we all know, if we watch these, I can't see the screens without my glasses. So let's go to the glasses.
Join the club.
Join the club. Whoa, look at that. People are commenting. Thank you. So let's see. We have Darius. Thanks for watching, Darius. I see you've posted a couple times. I don't know where you're from, but I appreciate you turning in. James, thank you for turning in. How can I attend RNDF? Can I attend in person? That is a really great question. Unfortunately, because of this really a handful of reasons, but one of the reasons really being the size that we have in our building. RNDF brings in about 900 guests, and that's about our capacity. So the people who are in attendance are the speakers, members of the defense industry, industry leaders in the defense community, like I said, members of Congress. So for anyone out there to tune in, you have to watch it on YouTube. We have dual panels throughout the entire day where we have two spaces. We have a main auditorium and we have the Air Force One Pavilion. So two panels go on simultaneously. We do show both live streams, so you can choose which one you want to watch. You can tune in live, or after the Defense Forum, we post every single panel and keynote and fireside chat on YouTube to live forever. You can go back and watch all the panels and discussions back all the way to 2013. And so the way to watch is on our YouTube channel, and we have a whole program there. If you just simply go, actually, you can just go to reaganinstitute.org. Reaganinstitute.org, and they have the program for the Defense Forum on the website, and then you can just watch it directly on YouTube. Again, starting 7:45 a.m. Pacific, 4:45 a.m. Eastern, and it runs until about 5 p.m. Pacific. Anything to add to that?
I would just add, certainly recommend that viewers tune in for the panels throughout the day. But one session that I'll highlight in particular, and you can check out, we have the agenda the full agenda for the day posted at rndf.org, is another place you can grab that. One session that we're all particularly excited about is the lunchtime session, where we'll have this bipartisanship and the representatives from the defense community that we've been mentioning on full display. We've announced yesterday that the keynote for the conference will be Secretary Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, who's been here each of his 4 years serving as the senior civilian leading the United States military at the Pentagon. And we'll also be awarding the Ronald Reagan Peace Through Strength Awards at that lunch session. Secretary Austin will be receiving one of the awards, and Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell will be receiving the other award. And so each of them will give a speech over that lunchtime session that should be a really wonderful opportunity to hear about their reflections from their time. Of course, his service in the Senate on Leader McConnell's side, his service both in uniform and as Secretary on Secretary Austin's side, and their reflections on peace through strength.
Just a quick follow-up. We were describing the program for the Defense Forum, but until now we hadn't mentioned the Peace Through Strength Award. And it's great we're going to have the opportunity to give that award to Secretary Austin and Leader McConnell. But that's a unique feature of the Reagan National Defense Forum, as you mentioned. We started in the first year that we wanted to use President Reagan's name, legacy, and this great foundation institute to celebrate those who are leaders in national defense through the Peace Through Strength Award. It's a beautiful award, kind of physically in terms of the eagle with Peace of the Berlin Wall and the talons. And we've had the honor of giving that award to some really distinguished people. I think of Vice President Dick Cheney. I think of Senator John McCain. I mean, there's a variety of folks over the years that have received that award that have added to really the special feeling and contribution I think the Defense Forum has made.
Yeah, no, good point. Just a note to the people around me, I'm being told on YouTube my mic keeps cutting in and out, so just an FYI, thank you for telling me that. Also, thank you to Alexis and the marketing team from San Jose. Sam, you've asked a really great question, and I'm not going to ask it because I have it in my hand. I'm going to ask the same question, so your question will get asked. Just hang tight, and then I'm going to ask the team if there's anything from Facebook. I think we've asked them all. Oh, Darius is watching from Lithuania, from the United Kingdom. That is incredible. Thank you for tuning in. So let's get back to some questions so that Sam can hear his question. So we are going to talk about, so again, 11 years of RNDF.
Yes.
How has it grown over the past 11 years?
Lots of ways. One, as we referenced before, it's grown in terms of participants. Year one, we had a few hundred, and as you mentioned just a moment ago, now we're at capacity, and this huge space here at the Air Force One Pavilion at the Reagan Library is filled to the max, and that's just a reflection of the great interest we have from people who want to be in the room. The media coverage has just proliferated, and Melissa, you've been a big part of that, but Fox News sends a crew here every year in a set, covers it live, CNBC, because as Rachel mentioned, so many of the leading CEOs and industry figures and increasingly tech figures want to come to the Reagan National Defense Forum, and so it's covered by the media. And then in terms of the industry leaders, we started out and you had the defense industrial base participating. We worked hard for that and grateful for some of the people and companies that supported us early on and participated. But it's really proliferated, and companies that are engaged with us now, I think of our lead supporter here at the Reagan National Defense Forum, Palantir. I mean, they were just starting out and really weren't on the radar screen in the national defense community back when we started the Reagan National Defense Forum. And now there's a huge tech presence.
Yes.
Because our national defense relies so heavily on our innovation base. Those are just a couple of ways the forum has really evolved and changed over the years. We've always done the Peace Through Strength Award. We've added policy dinners on Friday night. We're using different parts of the library facility to support it. We have a huge media center presence. So I can go on and on, but it's grown. It's become really a fixture for the national defense community.
Well, and I would actually add to your last sentence, a fixture to the defense community. Yes, we have to ask, but we really no longer have to ask the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of the Army or the Secretary of the Navy. Of course we ask, but it just sort of seems like they schedule it now to come every year to participate.
I could hear Rachel saying, well, it's actually not as easy as you suggest, but I think you're right. And it's a reflection of Rachel's great work, your work, and really the whole team's, where it's become the must-attend event for leaders in the national defense community. We don't take that for granted. We build those relationships, and I think it's not a convening for the sake of convening. I think that's the important piece. People understand that this big stage that we're on, and metaphorically the stage of the Reagan National Defense Forum, is a place where defense leaders know that if they want to make an impact, if they want to advance a policy argument, this is the place to do it. And that was our intent, and it's playing out, and we're going to continue to refine and improve it to make sure that continues to be the case going forward.
Well, and you were going to say something?
I was just gonna say that one other way, in addition to what Roger's mentioned, that the forum has really grown, to your question, Melissa, and kind of evolved over the years, is that in a sense, the conference has been reflective of the way that the concept of national defense has evolved. It's much broader than it was even 11 years ago, let alone when we look back to previous wars that we've been engaged with around the world. For example, both last year and this year, not just the Secretary of Defense, but also the Secretary of Commerce are joining for the Reagan National Defense Forum. The year prior to that, we had the Director of National Intelligence here at the Defense Forum. And so the ways that these kind of other, it's not just the Pentagon, it's not just the military, but it's sort of an evolving sense of our national security. When we think about, for example, we'll have a panel on Saturday about space capabilities. You know, we all turn on our phones for GPS, and the little blue dot, provided courtesy of satellites in the United States Air Force, right? There's this way that our daily lives and national security are really coming together, and that's certainly been reflective as the forum has evolved over the years too.
Well, and speaking of growth, I think one of the ways it's grown in a really important way is something, Rachel, that you really handle every year, and that's the annual defense survey. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So the Reagan National Defense Survey is an annual public opinion poll that we commission at the Reagan Institute every year. It's a nationwide survey of the American people. We don't do it ourselves. We hire a pair of professional polling firms that goes out and surveys the views of the American people on the issues that we talk about at RNDF every year. What we do, and we actually were in the field this year just days after the presidential election. And so when we publish the results tomorrow on Thursday, it'll be a great opportunity to really figure out, you know, certainly everybody's making a lot of predictions and prognostication about what the election and the transition means. We'll have data about where the American people want our country to go in terms of America's role in the world, national defense issues, national security issues, things like government spending. How much of the government's money should we be spending on our military? What should the U.S. role be with regard to the war in Ukraine, the conflict in the Middle East, et cetera? And so this is a product that we're really excited to put out every year. We talk about it at the Defense Forum. So the opening plenary panel on Saturday morning will focus on the results of this public opinion poll. And I think of it really as another way for the viewers to join RNDF, to see the views of the American people across the board as a country represented on stage at the Defense Forum, and really anchoring the conversations that policy leaders will be having throughout the day.
I just want to add a little bit to what Rachel said. She does a fantastic job managing the survey. I think year over year, it continues to become a focus and stands on its own almost, apart from the National Defense Forum, although, as Rachel mentioned, it drives a conversation. That was really the intent. I think two things that I really want to add to. One is we wanted to make sure that when we hosted the National Defense Forum, we were making news. And it wasn't people just recycling whatever talking points they wanted to put out there that they could say in Washington, D.C. or wherever they reside. It was really trying to drive a conversation. The second piece, and this is really, I think, a legacy of President Reagan, it brings the American people's voice into the conversation of national defense. So Rachel was just hitting on this. We have the definitive views of the American people about all the issues that are being discussed. And we want the policymakers, the elected officials, the military leaders to wrestle with the views of the American people and make sure that whatever they're advancing, it's rationalized with what we're seeing in that survey. I think that's really deepened and enriched the conversation at Defense Forum. And I know we're succeeding because we get fantastic coverage of the survey year after year, and it gets stronger year after year because we're building on it. Rachel's done a great job with this, where we're seeing kind of the trends play out in a lot of the questions we ask. And so that is another way that we're contributing to the policy conversation.
Well, and I know we can't talk about the survey that's going to be released tomorrow. Or embargo, that's fine. I won't mention it. But, and not to put you on the spot, but for people who are watching, to get a better sense of how the survey becomes news, can either of you think of something from the past 6 or 7 years of doing it where something came out that was a revelation or shocking or really made news, just so people at home can understand what the survey does?
I got one. I'm sure Rachel has a bunch. One that really we drove out of the defense survey and troubled us, frankly, was we saw a precipitous decline in the American people's support and confidence in the military. So one of the questions we put in from the beginning, since we started it, was, hey, do you have trust and confidence in the U.S. military? In the beginning, it was quite high. I would say in the 70s. 70% had trust and confidence in the military. And then over a 3-year period until last year, we saw this precipitous decline. And that was something in Washington, D.C., where Rachel and I lead the policy work of the Reagan Institute. We went to military leaders and said, hey, this survey shows we have a problem. What are we going to do about it? So we not only talked about it on stage with the service chiefs and others, about why the American people were lacking in their trust and confidence in the military, but it drove continued conversation back in Washington amongst those stakeholders. Well, there's
Yeah, it may be a kind of the other side of the coin to that. Roger talked about a downward trend. I'll talk about an upward trend that is related. Even as the American people's trust and confidence in the military was declining during the last several years, concern about the threat in particular posed by the People's Republic of China has been increasing also precipitously. And so in 2018, when Roger and the team started the survey work, the public opinion polling work that we do, I think it was 20% of Americans said that China was the greatest threat that we face. That number's now over half who identify when asked to pick one country that poses the greatest threat. China's at the top of the list. And that certainly shows that the views of the American people are reflecting what we've heard from Washington for many years on a bipartisan basis. Again, both the first Trump administration and the Biden administration in different ways, but putting the competition with the People's Republic of China front and center in their national defense strategies, national security strategies. That's really resonating with the way that the American people are thinking about the threats that we face. And I think it's particularly alarming given kind of the declining confidence that Roger mentioned in the military as an institution in terms of meeting those threats.
Yeah, those are great examples. I see a handful more questions. So, Kim from Austin, what's the goal of RNDF? That's a great question.
Well, simply put, the goal of the Reagan National Defense Forum is to get the leaders, convene the leaders, all the stakeholders of the national defense community for a day and a half, roughly, to focus on what policies we need to strengthen America's national defense. Lots of different views on how we get at that, but we think we're doing something good and positive for our military and for our national defense if we collect those stakeholders and have them debate it out about what we need to do to keep America strong.
That's great. Let's see. Oh, Thomas, let's see. How have the recent elections affected planning for the Defense Forum? And how can the Defense Forum contribute to the defense policy conversation? Oh my goodness. That's a long question with a lot of big words there, Thomas, that I can't really see with my glasses.
Well,
I'm sure someone could answer that.
Yeah, Thomas is a smart guy,
Thomas
clearly,
is a
with,
very
with,
smart
with the
guy.
use of the word interregnum. I mean, that's, but we're in this period where we have had the election in November and, of course, the inauguration in January, and a lot of speculation as to what we can expect from the Trump administration on national defense policy. And that will be a huge part of the conversation on stage at the National Defense Forum this weekend. One piece on this, and this is kind of a teaser for the survey, without giving anything away, Rachel, is President Trump's the first president since we started the Defense Forum to run a platform of peace through strength. Pretty much every social media post he's put out as it relates to a national security defense issue, it's hashtag peace through strength. We'll have an opportunity to explore what that means and what we can expect, and as Rachel referenced before, where there'll be continuity and change. But it will be the explication of what the leaders in the defense community think peaceful strength will look like under President Trump.
Yeah. Cindy, I think it was Cindy, said drones and satellite spying is a big issue. I know the media is late reporting. Will there be a panel on anything relating to that, perhaps, Rachel?
Yeah, one of the ways that the Defense Forum has really grown, Roger mentioned, was more technology companies in addition to the traditional defense companies. So companies that are maybe leading on things like software and technologies, even like drones and satellites, as opposed to the traditional defense companies that we might think of during, who are building ships and tanks and planes. They'll both be represented here at RNDF, and as the companies kind of more on that emerging tech side have been participating more and more in recent years, our policy conversations have reflected that as well, and it's been a huge effort from both Congress and the Pentagon to figure out kind of how to think about whether it's drones or satellites, space capabilities, even things like, of course, artificial intelligence and quantum computing and a bunch of other words that I know are important, even if I don't know exactly how they work. We've tried to be a place to convene the leaders who matter across those emerging technologies and capabilities and really provide a framework for how Congress, the Pentagon, the military, the companies can work together to solve hard problems by leveraging those emerging capabilities.
So we're going to get to Sam's question now, because it was a great question, Sam. Thank you. I was going to ask each of you what your number one favorite moment was of the past RNDFs that you've worked, and that might be hard. So I will start because mine actually goes back to the first one. And although there's really great moments every year, in 2013 it was our first Defense Forum, and we held a ribbon cutting ceremony for our Marine One helicopter we have here in the Air Force One Pavilion. And at the time, Chuck Hagel was the actual Secretary of Defense. But even though it was our first Defense Forum, he wasn't the only Secretary of Defense to come. We had both former Secretaries Leon Panetta and Robert Gates. And the three gentlemen stood together at our Marine One and cut a ribbon, and they were laughing and jovial and just having this great time. And it was sort of like standing among greatness. And it's just something I have never forgotten. So do each of you have a favorite moment?
Yeah, I'll give one. That's a pretty good one. It was a great moment. For me, it was when we gave the Peace Through Strength Award to George Shultz, the only member of President Reagan's cabinet that we had the opportunity to give the award to. Of course, he at the time was a trustee of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation Institute, and his remarks were so eloquent. Of course, he didn't have any notes in front of him. He spoke from the heart. A man who was so responsible for advancing President Reagan's policies during his time in office, and of course in the years afterwards continued to lead up until he was 100 years old. And I remember the message he gave, and it's one that he emphasized a lot towards the end of his life, which was trust is a coin in the realm. And it's, to me, a great example of how the forum is supposed to bring together those guiding principles that are applicable generation to generation, year to year. And George Shultz was a great example of that.
Great memory.
Well, I have lots of favorite memories as well, even though I haven't been working on as many defense forums as either of you. But one that I'll share was another ribbon cutting ceremony. Melissa, you mentioned one as well, for our tank, our M1 Abrams tank that's just outside that we unveiled a couple of years ago. The Chief of Staff of the United States Army, so the senior ranking U.S. Army official, joined us at the Defense Forum that year and gave a speech for the ribbon cutting for the new piece of military hardware that we were unveiling as part of our Peace Through Strength exhibit here at the Reagan Library. And there were a handful of local, very junior men and women in uniform in the United States Army standing behind him, 18, 19 years old, privates and private first class maybe, on stage with him, sort of holding the ribbon for the cutting and everything like that. And at the end of the ceremony, the Chief of Staff of the Army asked one of them to step forward. He was a private in the U.S. Army. And he said that as the Army's senior ranking military officer, he had the ability to promote people on the spot. And he had, through this young man's commanding officers and leadership, heard some great things about his service. And so he pinned his new rank on him to promote him right here at the Reagan National Defense Forum.
And then what did he do right after?
And then he had the young man call his mother, and he spoke with his mother by phone. And I think I was standing near Melissa, and I might have seen a little tear in your eye, as there was a little tear in my eye during that very special moment. I think for me, it really anchors, we have these very high-minded policy conversations with very senior leaders, and those will always be an important part of what we do here. But having those young men and women in uniform always a part of our conference here. We'll have some sailors, for example, from the USS Ronald Reagan, the aircraft carrier, here join us at the Defense Forum as well. Really helps keep the focus where it should be in terms of serving those service members.
Great, such an amazing moment. The Defense Forum is such a stoic event with important people doing important things, and that moment, I know there was a handful of us wiping tears from our eyes. So we just talked about our favorite moment. Do each of you have a moment that was just, not horrible, of course, but just it's a hard event? Something that sort of maybe it was a learning lesson or something that was just really hard to get through?
I've got one.
Go, great.
We've talked about the senior military leaders and Pentagon officials and members of Congress who come out every year, and even that is such a logistical feat that they all undertake to be here. And there was one year where the Reagan National Defense Forum was happening, I think was going to start just 6 or 7 hours before the government was going to run out of money. And we talk about defense spending a lot here at RNDF and the importance of properly funding our military to meet the threats that we face. And this was a time where whether or not the government was going to get its act together to pass an appropriations bill and continue to fund the government or have a government shutdown, of course, there would be much, much bigger ramifications of a government shutdown beyond our dear conference. But for those of us that were organizing the conference that year, we were on the edge of our seat, wondering if the government was going to shut down right when our defense forum was going to start. And unrelated, of course, to RNDF's start that year, but perfectly timed, they passed a continuing resolution to keep the government funded, and all of the leaders were able to join.
Good one.
Well, I look at the beginning. I think about how we started out. It actually is not tied to the Defense Forum itself, but the work we did to get it off. Just remember our colleague Bob Cochran and I, who was the other co-founder of the Defense Forum, really recruiting hard to get people to buy into the concept. And it kind of seems almost ridiculous now given all the success we've had. But I remember Bob and I were pitching the Defense Forum to, I believe, the Simi Valley Chamber of Commerce, trying to argue that this would be enhancing for Simi Valley, which I believe it has been. But in retrospect, it was kind of an odd place to advance and pitch a National Defense Forum, although the Simi Valley community has been great support.
So for me, and I wish I could remember the year, and knowing your guys' memories, you probably will. So Friday is policy dinner, Saturday is the actual forum. They are very long days. I think it was Friday night. I'd just gotten back to my hotel. We're exhausted, and my phone starts blowing up. President George H.W. Bush had passed away.
Yeah, that's right.
And so myself and a couple of others came back to the library because media, although he was, of course, president of the United States, he was President Reagan's vice president. So local media had wanted to do media here on our campus to sort of reflect his time as vice president. So a handful of us came back to the library, and we're here, sort of throughout the night, and just making sure that, sharing the focus on Saturday for the Defense Forum and honoring the president's life was challenging. So I only have one last question, and then we'll go to the screens one last time, and we'll get everyone out of here. I know someone asked you earlier what the goal was of the forum, but I guess for
Kim from Austin, I believe.
Kim from Austin. Good memory. I guess to each of you, when the Defense Forum is done every year, what is it that you hope people take away from it?
I hope they learn something. And I hope they feel that our national defense community, though there are debates and differences, is marching in a productive and positive direction. That there are serious people addressing what is undoubtedly very serious challenges facing this country. And they look at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation Institute as really being an important convener for a conversation that really goes to the heart of America's safety and security.
Great answer.
I hope that people come away, the participants come away also with the relationships that are needed to work together on a bipartisan basis. It's one thing to maybe come together to agree on a policy proposal or even an aspirational outcome that we should work toward. It's one thing to debate those differences that Roger mentioned, but it's another thing to really know each other as fellow leaders, maybe across the aisle or maybe across institutions. And we do a lot of things here at the Defense Forum. Those policy dinners are a good example, but even during every coffee break or anything like that, around the conference, you see senior leaders talking to senior leaders across difference. And I hope that provides some of the relationships that are needed to then go back to Washington and get work done to serve America's national defense and to serve our men and women in uniform.
Thank you. That's a great answer, too. I know you both are very busy. This is a very busy week for you. Let's just go to the screens one more time. Darius, yes, I agree. Thank you both for what you do. It's very important. And just looking really quick to see if we've missed anything. I think we've answered most of these. So again, just want to thank you all for tuning in. The Thank you guys for joining us. Again, the Defense Forum is live this Saturday, December 7th, from 7:45 a.m. Pacific to about 5 p.m. Pacific. And again, everything is live streamed on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Reagan Foundation. Or you can just tune in anytime thereafter because the videos will get archived and posted there. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next month.
One thing is certain. If we're to continue to advance world peace and human freedom, America must remain strong. We must turn a deaf ear to those born-again patriots who talk about strength while serving up the same old menu of weakness. If we have learned anything these last 8 years, it's that peace through strength works. Until next week, thanks for listening, and God bless you.